Welcome. Welcome to day 3 of healthy, natural, evidence-based ways to improve memory and prevent dementia. I'm Susan Gibson, your host, and I will do a brief recap of what we've covered the last few days and would love to hear from all of you about what has impacted you the most as well. We are recording, so there may be other people watching this later, but I hope you will contribute and ask questions anyway. I would love to have this be interactive, and folks are unmuted so it can be as natural as possible. So please mute yourself if there's noise in your background. So on day 1, we did an introduction and looked at how important our brain is. It's the control center for our entire body and controls pretty much everything we do.
Are you there?
Not doing well, none of you is doing well. So we looked at what actually causes memory loss and eventually dementia, and the pathology starts decades before your first memory loss symptom. So it's important for everyone, age 40 and above, to pay attention to their brain health and invest in their memory, because the things you're doing, even in your 40s and 50s, are impacting your risk of memory loss in the longer term. We also talked about the fact that the traditional medical community, of which I am one, has not offered much hope on the front of memory loss and dementia. And that is why I am here. Because of my mother's Alzheimer's, I quit my full-time job in the pharmaceutical industry and started a company trying to find solutions, because we need solutions, we need hope. And there is hope, because 50% of dementia cases can be prevented, and we are going through the different methods of preventing dementia and improving memory. So who remembers the acronym FAST, my proprietary method? Do you remember what the letters stand for? Anyone? What's the F in FAST for?
Food.
Food, very good. And A? That's what we're talking about today.
Activity.
A is activity. Yes, thank you, Richard. And what about S and S? These are the categories of things you're going to want to be thinking about addressing, because these are the proven methods. Stress and sleep. Yes, yes. So if you want to think about the main things you're going to do, we go in a lot more detail, but you want a healthy diet, you want activity. We're going to go over a couple different areas of activity. You want to reduce stress, probably increase your sleep if you're a typical American. And what's T for?
Treat diseases.
Treat underlying illness.
Treat the diseases that are revving up the pathology. And what's the other T?
Thoughts.
Thoughts, yes. Your optimism, a positive mental attitude makes a huge difference and is actually training your brain. And we'll talk more about that later. So yesterday we talked about the F in FAST, which is food. And we discussed that sugar is pretty toxic for your body. What do you think would happen if you put ice cream in your gas tank of your car? You think it would run very well? Well, it's designed to run on gas. And your body's the same way. It's not designed to run on sugar. It's designed to run on natural, healthy, plant-based foods. And it doesn't run very well on sugar. And we talked about how addicting sugar can be and the tolerance that develops with sugar. We also talked about the fact that you need good fats. You need to get DHA. You don't make your body, it occurs naturally in your body, but it starts declining with age and you don't make any more. So you have to consume it, either through fish or through a supplement. That's actually a great place to take a supplement. You need at least 1,000 milligrams of DHA a day, and more if you're having any kind of memory loss. So you want the good fats, the good healthy fats. You don't want the saturated fats, which are unhealthy, coming from, bacon and other types of fats. And we talked about how amazing vegetables are, that they overcome toxins, and they actually have been shown to both prevent and treat dementia and memory loss. And the more vegetables, the better. The data are amazing on vegetables. So really encourage you to eat as many vegetables as you can. We talked about the fact that berries and walnuts are great. And the Mind diet is a fantastic diet that's designed specifically for improving memory. And we mentioned supplements. And even if you're eating a healthy, balanced diet, it's a great idea to take supplements. They're very easy to take, and we just don't get the nutrients we want, especially because these days we're eating lots of processed foods. And we talked about processed foods as well, and reading your labels. So that gets us to today, when we're going to talk about activity. Larry had some great questions yesterday. Larry brought up questions about periwinkle, which is a supplement that's actually approved in Japan and Europe for cognition. And its big claim to fame is that it increases the blood flow to the brain and is good for the blood vessels in the brain. The challenge, which is very important, because your brain is only 2% of your total body weight, but it consumes 20% of the nutrients and oxygen that your body uses. And oxygen is hugely important, and the brain cannot function without oxygen. So good blood flow, you'll hear us talking frequently about blood flow to the brain. That's a very important aspect of brain health. The challenge with periwinkle is that it is pretty strong and does have some side effects. You can get really low blood pressure. It also causes some nausea and other side effects, and it actually can be toxic to not only the brain, but also the liver and the kidneys. So you got to be careful with it. It does have some benefits, but not the level of safety that we hope to see. And so it's not used as much. Phosphatidylserine is also a known cognitive enhancer. It does also have some benefits. It improves nerve function. It is naturally occurring in our bodies, and there are foods that you can eat that can help increase your levels of phosphatidylserine, including white beans and eggs and liver. So there is one study in patients with some mild memory loss, mild cognitive impairment, that did show some improvement in memory, but it also has side effects: insomnia, gas, stomach upset, and it is a blood thinner. So you have to be careful if you're on blood thinners, and it has lots and lots of interactions with prescription drugs. So again, you need to be careful if you're going to take it, and talk to your doctor and be sure that they understand the other things that you're on. But those are fantastic questions, and I love it, Larry, that you're researching and looking at what can I do, what are these products out here. That's awesome. Investing in your brain health, go. That's what we want to do. So does anyone have comments on things that have impacted them in the last 2 days? What's been the most meaningful for you?
It was eye-opening to get some of the results on my tests.
Yeah.
Some I did well, some not so well.
Yes. Yes. There's lots of different aspects of cognitive function. Your brain is so complicated. It's probably the most complicated thing in all of creation. And different people will have different issues in different areas. Yeah. Which often translates to the place in your brain that is not as strong or not quite as healthy. But yeah, that's great. It's good to do those brain tests every so often. because it's hard for us to assess changes in our own cognitive performance. So the best way to do that is every 6 months, just take those little brain tests. They only take a few minutes, and it gives you some indication if your memory has declined significantly since the last time. That will be obvious on the brain test, because we all talk about the fact that, oh, Aunt Jane is declining, but we never tell Aunt Jane because it's too offensive, and we're not good at assessing our own cognitive function. So it's great to have something to track, and that's why the tracker has multiple dates there. If you're changing your habits significantly, you might want to track more frequently. So if you start employing what we're talking about this week, you might want to check some of those brain tests again after a month and after 3 months to see how much it's impacting your memory and what aspects of your cognition might be impacted by your new habits when you're eating 5 servings of vegetables a day and
Getting off that sugar.
yes, yes, right.
Susan, I only received the brain test. You said test as in plural. I only received one. Is there, how many are there?
I'll be sure you have it. The brain test came the day before we started, and the brain health habits questionnaire came with the homework from day one.
Okay,
But
I missed, I missed yesterday, so I didn't know if maybe I checked my email and before coming on today. And
okay.
That only one I got was the brain test.
I'll just be sure to send it again. Thanks for letting me know. It's good to see you here.
Thank you.
Susan,
So I
I
realized that.
power of veggies. Oh, sorry, Richard.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the power of vegetables, Susan, really, and that's something that is, I feel like, completely attainable. 1.3 servings a day and 11 years younger in brain health. That's absolutely fantastic. And I did write my list of veggies that I want to add in. And
Great.
I feel like that's a very simple, manageable change to help. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Sorry,
Awesome.
Rachel, go for it.
Thank you, Cassandra. That's great. Good job investing and taking action. That's awesome.
Well, I realized that the cranberry juice that I was using to take my Glory Day with every morning has 9 grams of sugar in it. I said, we've got to do something about that.
Yeah.
And that you really impacted me about anyway, I had sardines for lunch today based upon what happened yesterday. So
Good for you.
Yay.
That's great. Excellent. Wonderful. It's awesome to see folks employing what we're talking about here. That's fantastic. Great. All right, so let's start with today's, well, if we can get it to share. Is that showing in display mode for you?
Yes, but we're seeing the side slides too.
Oh, you are?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Both on one screen?
We are. I am anyway. Yeah.
That is
Just
interesting.
put it on slideshow. Well, you've already done that.
Well, yeah. Let's just try resharing it one time and see if it makes any difference. Is that better?
That's it.
Okay, awesome. All right, so day 3 activity. We did talk a little bit about the homework already, but does anybody else have comments on what happened when did you write down the vegetables that you selected?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. And Richard found foods that had a lot of sugar. I don't know, did anyone else have any
Oh,
discoveries?
yes. Everything in the refrigerator.
It's shocking, but that's
Yeah,
our
I mean-
culture right now. They add sugar to everything. Go ahead, Carolyn, I'm sorry.
No, I just said, oh my gosh, everything I looked at.
Yeah,
I was like, Richard, I went, 1 grams? Wait, are you kidding me?
yeah. 'Yeah, shocking.
Yeah, I
So
thought
it
it was
takes,
okay. I didn't have any Coke around. When you said 1/3 of a can of Coke is sugar, I thought, my Lord,
it's,
I could feel my brain shrinking.
yeah,
Just,
mountain. Yes. Yeah, sodas are terrible. And they melt the sugar down. So by volume, yeah, it's one of the worst things They're, because people don't realize how much sugar they're getting. Okay.
Susan, excuse me, does that
Yes,
apply also to things like orange juice?
it does.
Okay.
Orange juice is
Yeah.
actually what they use for diabetics. If you get too high a dose of your insulin, they tell you to drink orange juice because that is the fastest way to immediately raise your blood sugar. So fruit juices, we talked about that a little bit yesterday. You need to be careful with fruit. Fruit is a natural thing to eat, so it is healthier than many other things that you could choose to eat. But fruit, by and large, is pretty high sugar, particularly oranges, some of the citrus. Now, some of them are a little less, like grapefruit doesn't have quite the same sugar content as cherries or something like that. But you do need to be careful because fruit is high sugar. And Larry, you actually asked me offline another question about types of sugar. Like, what about honey versus cane syrup? And honey is better. It does have a lower glycemic index than a processed cane sugar. And fructose, which is the sugar in fruit, is healthier and better than some of the highly processed sugars, but they will still raise your blood sugar. So it's better, but you want to be careful about how much fruit and how much even natural maple syrups, honeys, the natural sugars you eat. Another thing that we didn't really discuss is organic. And a lot of foods will say that they're organic on them, but it doesn't necessarily change the food content. And that's a whole long discussion. Organic can be cleaner than non-organic, but sometimes people just think because a box of potato chips says, a bag of potato chips says organic on it, that means it's going to be healthy, or it says natural. They're like, oh, okay, this is good for me to eat. And there's a lot of marketing out there, so you got to be a little bit careful. Okay, great comments. So today we are talking about activity. And there's 3 different segments of our activity discussion: physical activity, brain activity, and social activity. So physical activity, this is a broad category, but any kind of exercise, any kind of moving your body, we were designed to move and to exercise. And just like with the food before the Industrial Revolution, most people were living on farms. They were working hard all day with physical labor, and physical activity and exercise helps every aspect of your body and especially helps your brain. The benefits are immediate as well as long-term, and the benefits are numerous. So immediately when you exercise, you are improving the blood flow to your brain, which increases the amount of oxygen that gets there. And as we mentioned, with 20% of the oxygen and nutrients of your body being utilized by your brain, it needs that blood flow, it needs that oxygen. You actually lay down new neurons, and they've shown immediate benefits in brain tests right after exercise. You may notice after you exercise, you feel like, as long as you don't exercise too, it is possible to exercise so extremely that your brain has troubles if you're an ultra marathon runner or something. But in general, I don't know if you've noticed that you feel you are awake and your brain is generally more clear after you exercise. You do release a number of neurotransmitters that are excellent. The dopamine, the feel-good hormone that we talked about, gets released when you eat sugar. You can just exercise and get that same feel-good dopamine release. Serotonin is also released, and serotonin, we know, is important for not having depression and is used as a treatment for depression. So these are great hormones, great neurotransmitters to have released, and there's other BDNF and other desirable hormones that and neurotransmitters that are released. Exercise also reduces inflammation, and we talked, there's many diseases that inflammation is a big problem for, and we talked about inflammation and oxidation and their roles in memory loss. So there's direct effects on the brain, direct effects on the neurons themselves. The neurons are strengthened, and exercise reduces the brain shrinkage that we talked about. That is part of the pathology. Exercise is a great treatment for depression. It improves your mood, your energy, and many of the diseases that we talked about that are risk factors for dementia and memory loss. It not only helps those, improving your cholesterol profile and your blood pressure and your cardiovascular disease and diabetes, but it also improves the brain and brain function itself. So exercise, whatever you can do, even walking, this is one of the things we're going to look at, even walking is really beneficial. But our culture has, even in comparison to Europe, we take cars everywhere, whereas some other cultures have more of a habit of walking. And you walking every day to wherever you're doing, increasing your walking, taking stairs, doing more aggressive exercise is great too. But the important thing is to elevate your heart rate. So doing it over a period of time consistently and walking fast enough is really one of the keys to getting a lot of these benefits, particularly for the brain. The data supporting the benefits of physical exercise is so long, I couldn't even begin to cover it. There are hundreds of studies that show extensive benefits of exercise in a variety of different areas. So like we talked about with the vegetables and the berries that were very doable, there are amounts of exercise here that show significant benefits that are very doable. So one study showed that a brisk walk for 30 to 45 minutes, 3 times a week or more, reduced dementia risk, cut it almost in half.
Wow.
So how many people think that a brisk walk 30 to 45 minutes a day, 3 or more days a week is doable?
Yep.
For most people, that's pretty doable. And that's a shocking piece of data. That's huge, 50%, almost 50% cut in your dementia risk. So again, doable, very doable options here. The more you do, the better. So if you walk 1.3 miles a day in another study, that's also pretty doable. That's, you know, a 30 to 40 minute walk. They showed, another study showed that that lowered mortality by 22%. And if you do flights of stairs, which is a more aggressive exercise, this is more exertion, going to increase your heart rate more, but 8 or more flights of stairs a day lowered mortality by 33% in another study. And these last studies are looking at your level of conditioning. So it's not one individual course of exercise, but when you're exercising regularly, your cardiovascular system gets more fit, your brain gets more fit, your body gets more fit, your muscles get more fit. And looking at levels of fitness, which means that people are exercising pretty regularly, this Finnish study showed that a conditioned exerciser had a 43% reduction in mortality versus an occasional exerciser. So there's a number of studies. I just picked selected studies that I thought helped us to get a frame of reference for what you need to do. But the point is, the more you do, the more benefits that you have. The better conditioned you are, the better your memory and the biggest reduction in the risk of dementia. And this last study is shocking to me. It's the same thing. It's looking at a level of conditioning, cardiovascular conditioning. And this particular study was done in women, but it's been repeated in numerous other studies. This is a long-term study. They followed these women for 44 years. So this gets back to what are you doing in your 40s and 50s is impacting your 70s and 80s. The high cardiovascular fitness group had 88% less dementia than the moderate fitness group. So you don't have to be a marathon runner to experience benefits, but the more aggressive your exercise, the more frequent, the longer your exercise, the more the benefits. An 88% reduction, I mean, moderate cardiovascular fitness is pretty good. So we can go from wherever we are to better and better, and there continue to be benefits no matter how far we go here. You do need to be a little bit careful based on what sport you choose and what activity that you're doing, not to get injured, but physical activity is just amazingly beneficial. So what do we do in response to this? The American Heart Association recommends moderate to intense exercise, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. Or if you're doing more intense exercise, a minimum of 20 minutes, 3 times a week. So again, these are doable. These are the minimums, but you can pick what you like to do. This is, again, going to be very personal and individualized. And we talked about the fact that motivation is important. So pick a sport you like. I know it's hard right now when we're in shelter in place, but initiating a walking group, going on hikes, you can address both social interaction and physical activity if you do any kind of group sport or group activity. And again, look at the intensity of your exercise, the duration of your exercise, and the frequency of your exercise. All of those contribute to the benefits that you're getting. And you do need to keep doing them at least a few times a week. Any questions on physical activity? Does anybody have any thoughts of things that they have done that have been effective in taking their physical activity to the next level? Again, whether that's from almost nothing to something, what works? Anybody have ideas?
I had started walking and found it amazing. And not only was I getting the physical exercise, but it was also, to me, almost like a meditation as
Yes.
well as I walked. So it was also giving me that mental
Yes.
exercise, well, not
Yes.
exercise, but stress reducing.
Yes. Yes.
And it was wonderful.
Yeah, you can do multiple
fantastic.
things. Yes. Do deep breathing while you're walking, pray, whatever it is, listen to a video or a podcast or something. Yeah, that's awesome. And addresses multiple areas of benefit. That's great. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have anything that's worked for them?
So when I was in my 50s, I did a lot of ultimate frisbee because it's got a lot of intense running. But kind of as my knees started to have problems, I switched to tennis, which there's tons of teams all over the United States, and I did. Still doing that. Can't do it now, but because of the COVID. But and there are guys playing tennis that were 80 years old, and they would beat me, which was embarrassing. Because they knew where I was going to hit the ball and where to hit it back.
Yeah.
So you can play that game until you're in your 90s. It's an amazing sport.
It is, and it's social, and you're often outside in the sunshine, and you don't really even notice you're exercising when you do something you enjoy like that. Yeah, so tennis is a great social, physical, community kind of activity. That's great. Thanks, Patrick. What gets in the way? Because most people, before you came to this webinar, how many people knew that exercise was good for you?
Yep.
Yeah, everybody knows. Oh yeah, yeah, we need to be exercising. But there's a lot of things that get in the way. And I think that's the biggest thing for us to think about here is what are the hindrances? I know for me, time is a big one. Does anyone have any solutions? Like, do you schedule physical activity in your schedule? Do you make it a priority? Because I mean, our time is a little bit different for some people now if they aren't working with COVID-19, but there's all these time pressures that can easily push taking care of yourself and investing in yourself out of the way. Physical activity is one of the most powerful things that you can do for yourself.
But this works for me. Get it done right away. Out of bed, hit the bathroom, exercise. Regular routine happens every day before breakfast. Okay, this is what we do. And that works for me. So
that's awesome.
Because if I don't do it right away, I find things to stop me.
Yeah, it's great discipline too.
So getting it done right away.
Yeah.
I would have to second that. That's normally my routine, is getting up in the morning and getting it done in the morning right away before I start the rest of my day. And it just makes everything else go a whole lot better too. My brain is awake and my adrenaline's going and I'm in a good space and I feel just good and I sleep better, and it's a big old circle as long as I get my morning exercise routine in.
That's great. Good job, Jennifer. Excellent. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
beginning
lucky,
of the day. Awesome.
I'm lucky to be able to do my exercise during work. As a nanny, I take the kids out for a walk every day. And part of that is I also want to teach the kids that being outside and walking and exercise is just something we do and it's fun.
Yeah.
So I do a 2-mile walk each day, and the kids are 21 months old, and they each walk at least a half mile of it.
That's great.
And I'm trying to work so they walk a little bit further and further on the walk, and that gets me, although some of it is my walking is unfortunately not getting my heart rate up. I'm going at a 21-month-old pace.
Yes.
But I'm
gotta do it.
But I'm outside, and even when it's cold, and if it's misting, or last week, yes, it was snowing.
Oh wow! Oh my goodness.
Not a lot, but still get them out there. And I'm hoping to, like I said, impress upon them the habit of being outside and being active.
That's excellent. Yeah. Yeah. Just even the fresh air. You're right. It's a great habit, and early in the morning is awesome. That's good. And
it's not so great.
What's
Not
that?
so good. On the weekends, I'm not so good.
When you don't have the kids to motivate you to get out. Yeah.
They are my
Yeah.
motivation.
It takes some discipline. So that's one of the things we've been talking about is if we're relying on ourselves and we don't have anyone to be accountable to, and we don't have something scheduled or scheduled with other people, it's very easy to just go with how we feel at the moment, which is why if you can find a sport to pick up or something to do with other people. I know right now is a little bit unusual time, but even doing yard work with others or organizing a group to go on hikes or joining a gym and taking a fitness class. I find for me, the amount of exertion that I put out if I say, okay, I'm going to go work out is very different if I'm just doing it on my own pace than if I take a class and I'm, you know, there's other people there and I'm keeping up. So this is a good place to ask for accountability with someone else as well. I mean, it's great if you can do it with them, which might not always work in this particular season with COVID, but it's great to have the social interaction as well as the physical activity when you can, just like you do, Sharon, with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So next is brain activity. So who knows the saying, what happens if you don't use it?
Use it or lose it.
Use it or lose it. That is a perfect saying for brain activity. Using your brain is so important. I don't know how many of you have heard of the concept of neuroplasticity.
Mm-hmm.
This is, they're learning more and more about how flexible the brain is. So if you do a certain activity and use your brain in this way over here, you actually lay down new neurons and create new neuronal connections because you're using that particular aspect of your brain. And other parts of your brain that don't get used, those neurons die off. So our actions, our thoughts every day are changing our brains. They call it neuroplasticity. Neuro is the neuron, the neurons, and plasticity means it's so flexible. Our brain is constantly changing. We are laying down new neurons until the day we die. It does slow down a little bit as we age, but you are training your brain with everything that you do. And it's important to keep using it. Your brain is like a muscle. If you don't use it for a long time, you lose the tone, you lose the health in that muscle. So it's fascinating. The brain is so complex and so amazing. Using your brain over time makes a difference too, and all of the different ways you use it. So it's quite interesting to see that a low level of education is actually a pretty big risk factor for dementia. And that's not only, so you're getting dementia way after you stopped your education, but part of it is how much are you continuing to use your brain on a day-to-day basis? And those that have less education, there's some thoughts that maybe they're doing jobs that aren't continuing to stimulate their brain as much. So whether you're stimulating your brain at work or at play, in your social activity, in your sport, however you're stimulating your brain, it's important to keep stimulating it and keep stimulating it in new and different, a variety of different ways. The concept of education also is referenced by the term cognitive reserve. And Donna mentioned this on the first day, but they are discovering that some people have significant pathology in their brain, but they don't exhibit memory loss or dementia. And other people have less pathology, less of the plaques on the neurons and in the neurons, and they have significant issues. And they've come up with the term cognitive reserve because it seems that the more you use your brain, you have this reserve that helps you to not go into the symptom stage. We talked about that slippery slope, and the symptoms don't happen until much later. So there are studies showing that there were 25% of elderly people who had the pathology of Alzheimer's, but didn't have any memory loss symptoms. So that portion of the population had a good cognitive reserve. They had developed their brain enough that it overcame the pathology.
Is that the sister study?
That isn't particularly the nun study, but there is, that's good, Richard. There is a very famous study of nuns. Nuns, where they studied them for over 80 years. And the nuns all ate the same things, lived in the same environment. So it's a wonderful controlled environment. They gave their brains at the end of the study to do autopsies, and they wrote journals for every year for their entire life. And what they found was that many of these nuns had the plaques, the beta amyloid plaques and the tau tangles in their neurons. Their brains shrank. Their brain pathology was significant. They didn't express a single symptom. So the concept of cognitive reserve, that the nun study is one of the most famous studies that the scientific community then wanted to understand, well, why is it that some people express symptoms and some people don't? And this just means that it's all that much more important to continue using your brain in a variety of different ways all the time, because you're building a reserve that can help you in the future as well. Yeah, thanks, Richard. And the cognitive stimulation, I mean, we've talked about the brain pathology with the neurons dying, the brain shrinking, the plaques, and cognitive stimulation actually causes you to have new neurons, increases your brain size, and makes the neurons that you have less likely to die. So wherever you're getting your brain stimulation, whether it's through your work, whether it's taking a class, whether it's doing some kind of fun leisure activity, it's really important to keep using your brain on a regular basis. I know Tyra mentioned Lumosity before. There are a handful of companies now that have created brain training apps, and you can do a membership and play all different kinds of games that stimulate different aspects of your cognition to keep your memory sharp.
Susan, is there any data to indicate that dementia of whatever type does affect one kind of intelligence versus another? Spatial versus verbal versus physical versus sensual versus, you know, social? Yeah,
It's a great question, and it varies some from person to person. The hippocampus is the part of the brain that is the most often impacted by dementia, and the hippocampus is where memory occurs. So it does depend on where in the brain you get the pathology, and that will increase the amount of symptoms you're likely to see in the area that that particular part of the brain is responsible for. But there's not great data to understand, is it more an issue of processing speed or more, there is a progression that usually goes from losing short-term memory first to then losing longer-term memory, which is more difficult to recall, pull things back out of recall. But by the time you get to substantive memory loss, there's pretty vast areas of cognition that are impacted,
Yeah.
and it does vary some from person to person.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, good question. So here's some of the data. There are, again, lots of different data on using your brain, but the main takeaways, I picked some select studies for particular reasons. The main takeaways is that using your brain helps at any age and stage. And whether you already have memory loss, even if you have Alzheimer's, it still helps to keep using your brain. Sometimes it's more challenging to continue using your brain when you are experiencing the memory loss because you don't do all of the activities. But this first study here is in Alzheimer's patients, and just doing some math and language aloud improved their performance versus not doing the math and language. Again, this is aloud, which is interesting because we're talking about declarations here as well. So speaking is an important aspect of it as well, but they did show improvements even in Alzheimer's patients and in mild cognitive impairment, which is significant memory loss, but not yet to the point of dementia. Playing these brain games for 8 hours a week, that's very doable, an hour or so a day. In just 1 month, they had improvements in a whole variety of different cognitive measures. And it's fun, like Tyra said. It's interesting, and you can pick which kinds of brain games you want to do. It is helpful to do different brain games over time if you happen to like playing games, because the games will impact a certain area of your brain, and it may not. So like we talked about with the neuroplasticity, you're doing a great job of laying down your neurons in that particular activity, but other types of activities then aren't being developed. So diversity is great. Again, in a week, in 5 weeks, in a month, you're seeing benefits from regular activity in many of these tests. It improved accuracy and speed of controls in the third study. The fourth study listed here is looking at some specific brain apps. One of them is named Brain Age, another is named Tetris. These two apps actually have clinical data on them, and both of them improved memory and processing speed and executive function. So that's awesome. The Tetris app, which is a puzzle, actually improved intention and visuospatial ability more than Brain Age did. So Tetris is a popular brain app that seems to be working really well. And the next one, they did crossword puzzles, and the crossword puzzles actually showed a 70% improvement in some of the testing and was comparable to 2 to 7 years of cognitive age improvement. So that's pretty dramatic improvement from a couple months of doing crossword puzzles. And the next one, this is a really big study. This is almost 3,000 patients followed for 10 years. And they did these sessions that were working on the speed of processing. And the benefits were maintained after the time that they did the exercises, and it lowered dementia 29%. Each additional training session was lowering dementia another 10%. So this is what they call a dose response. They were seeing that the more you do, the more benefit you get. So the brain activity is just like eating vegetables and physical activity. More is better. Use it or lose it. All right. So the conclusion is any level of cognitive function, regardless of your amount of memory loss, will benefit from continuing to use your brain. You see the benefits pretty much right away. One of the interesting things is that there's some very mixed results here. Those who are doing video games do find that Visuospatial orientation improves significantly. But whether or not what you're doing transfers to other tasks is not known. Some studies have shown improvements in other areas of cognitive function and some haven't. So if you're training to recognize colors and match colors, you get good at matching colors, but that doesn't mean that your judgment or your speed or something else is going to improve. You do get better at the thing that you're doing. And you may notice this if you play any of these games. You do crossword puzzles, you get better at crossword puzzles. That might not make you better at processing speed or numerical calculations. The data are a little soft here. It may help in prevention of memory loss progression, but the data are not always consistent. Not all of the studies have been positive, and there are less studies showing that once your memory actually declines. I mean, we showed that one study in mild cognitive impairment and in Alzheimer's, but it's really best to do this soon and build up that cognitive reserve, because the data are a little less unclear how well it works in improving. Once you've already slid down that slippery slope with the pathology, the data are not quite as strong.
A lot of the studies, if I could put this, not a lot, but there's a portion, and maybe a large portion of the studies are done by the makers of the games.
Yes, yes.
Which is, tells, it's a little suspect.
It could be, depending on how they did it and whether they had good controls. Yeah, yes. Yeah, many of them are just looking for marketing claims. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not to dismiss them. I'm not saying, but one of my grandsons was 11 years old, trying to motivate his parents to let him view his games like what is it, Mindspace something, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he wrote a paper for school saying how great this was. So I took a look at his research, and every one of his citations was from a game manufacturer.
Mm.
Of course, he said his brain was just being treated marvelously by all this and advancing.
Right.
So see, Mom and Dad, what I can do with all this gaming?
Yeah, and people do tend to just play one game that they enjoy, which is good. I'm not discouraging doing crossword puzzles or doing whatever you enjoy, but it actually stresses the brain a little bit more in a good way, talking about laying down these new neurons if we're doing new and different functions. And we talked about that yesterday with even brushing your teeth with a different hand, combing your hair. Anything that you can do that changes your pattern and uses new brain cells is great. So if you've been playing Mindspace or whatever that game is, it's better for your brain if you do a variety of different types of games. And in fact, most of these companies that have memberships have a huge variety of different brain games that you can play. Yeah. So any kind of doing a new hobby, learning an instrument, taking a course, any of those kinds of things are great. One other thing that helps stimulate the brain that we haven't talked about too much here is doing things. This is especially true in people who actually have memory loss. Doing things that stimulate old memories is great for elderly folks who are having memory loss. So looking at photos, playing old songs that they recognize, things that bring them to the point of tears. Dr. Dale Bredesen, who wrote the book on the end of Alzheimer's, has seen some great success with emotion-evoking activities that are, of course, stimulating additional parts of the brain by reaching the person's memories through emotion. Okay. So social activity, those developmental theory has looked at this, and this is a very well accepted, long-standing concept that basically our brains develop from social interactions and from being in community. We are just wired to be connected to other people and to be in relationship. And the act of doing social activity is amazingly powerful. And scientifically, they have seen that you lay down new brain cells from reading the other person's emotions, and just being with another person promotes your brain repair. So it's not only improving your social skills, but it's also improving your judgment and many other aspects of your cognitive ability. It's also really important for enjoying your life. And we looked at what a huge risk factor depression was, increasing your risk of dementia by 4 times. So this takes some initiative many times, but socializing is great for every aspect of your health. The animal studies that have been done, they are trying to understand, okay, so being isolated definitely hinders cognitive function and your brain tests, but can we reverse it? And there's a number of animal studies. It's very interesting. They have a mouse be alone, and they do things to hinder the mouse's memory, and they have big problems. And all they have to do is put another mouse in the cage, and the mouse gets better, and the cognitive deficits go away. So re-socializing does actually, at least in the animals, has shown that it reverses the memory loss. It's just really important to be with people and to have relationships and to share of ourselves and who we are. These are, again, a couple of selected studies. Just imagining being isolated, just imagining it. You're not actually isolated. The memory tests got worse when people imagined being isolated. The group that wasn't imagining being isolated didn't have their memories get worse. Another huge study, 14,000 patients for 11 years. Loneliness worsened their memory by more than 30%. Loneliness. It's really important to address that. A meta-analysis looked at 19 different large studies tracking people over time, and low social participation in this study increased dementia 41%, and obviously it increased the loneliness because they weren't participating and the loneliness was self-rated. So the next one is a study on volunteering for retired folks, and volunteering once a month improved memory and cognitive activity, and I'm sure it improved quality of life as well. They looked at twins, and if you were socially engaging, the twin that was doing the social engagement had a later onset of dementia than the twins that were not socially engaging. And women tend to be a little better at social networks, and that in another study reduced dementia risk 26%. So having daily contact with people is really important. And unfortunately, loneliness is at epidemic levels in this country. There's a Cigna study that showed that 46% of Americans report that they're sometimes or always alone. And this is before COVID-19 and staying in your home. And Brigham Young University showed that loneliness is as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Wow. So if you can combine social activity with physical activity and brain activity, addressing multiple areas is by far the best. So what can you do? This is just a great place to initiate. Make a friend, reach out to someone. My dad goes fishing in the pond at his retirement community with someone. There's a woman who used to come into my mother's memory care unit and paint their nails or sing songs. There's always people that are worse off than you are. This is a great place to give back and to help others and to reach out to others. And getting a pet or being around family or kids is a great thing to do. Our time has gone faster today than I had hoped. So maybe we'll just move on, because I do want to not run over too much, to doing our declaration to speak to our brains how important it is. So if you'll do the declaration out loud with me, if you're comfortable. I value my brain. I thank my brain for all that
it's done for me.
I choose to invest in my health
Brain health.
and my brain health. I will take
action to ensure that I keep my memory.
All right. Well, please, the homework is thinking about what gets in your way of doing more exercise or activity. I think those hindrances are pretty key. Brainstorming 2 ways to increase socialization and connection with people. This is really going to take some creativity in our current situation, but whether we're doing it over video like we are, there are still ways to do it. And commit to 3 activity improvements and write them down. So again, writing is like speaking. It's an additional way of telling your brain, I'm doing this. And then your brain helps you to actually carry it forward. So thank you so much for coming and being with us today. I am excited to join you again tomorrow for day 4, when we talk about stress, sleep, and treating diseases.
Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.
Take
See you
care.
tomorrow.
Bye-bye. See you tomorrow.